You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Mike.
Glad to be back again. They keep letting me back in the hotel, Kate.
Oh, man. Well, this week at Hotel Pacifico, we're going legendary with a legendary public figure who has spent her time interviewing other legends. From there, we'll join Geoff in the strategy suite, where opinions are freely shared without fear of arrest, even though the province has backed down somewhat on decriminalization. We're going to talk polls. How could we not? And we might even find our way to talk about Surrey. The future lives there, or so they like to say.
But first, our guest today is Carole Taylor, who needs no introduction, but I'll provide one in any event. She continues her storied career as host of Check TV new show, Carole Taylor's Journal, following her previous show, the successful BC Legends series, which I think there are about 26 episodes that are that are living online for everyone to watch. Returning to media comes full circle for Carole, who started out her career on such nationally known shows as Canada AM and W5, where she reported on the Yom Kippur War as a young journalist. Kind of every life is a circle, everything comes back. And here we are again, and we might have to send Carole to the front lines yet again to the Middle East. She tackled civic politics and is the last person elected as an independent at Vancouver City Council, where she served 2 terms, and then had selective amnesia and ran for provincial politics in 2005, becoming the Minister of Finance. And we'll get into what happened there, but some very topical things happened during her tenure as Minister of Finance that echoed today as well. That's not all, folks. Carole's also served as the chair of CBC Radio Canada, chair of the board, and also chair of the Vancouver Port Corporation, among many other public endeavors that she's done for giving back to the community over the years. Phew. Oh, yeah. She's also an officer of the Order of Canada. So, Carole, we've run out of time today for this interview. We'd like to thank you for coming in. Oh, we'll save you a few minutes to talk here. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you coming to the hotel, checking into the hotel.
Thank you both. I'm so pleased you're doing this podcast. We don't get enough news, especially political news, from anywhere these days.
Well, we like to call this conversations that really matter.
Oh, I'll tell Stuart.
Just kidding. That's a great series. Stu McNish does a great job putting that together.
Let's talk about actually, you've come full circle. And you've got a new show. Can you tell us about what's behind your new show, Carole Taylor's Journal?
Well, it's really looking at the issues, as you do, of course. I've spent the last 3 years doing people. I really felt so strongly about getting on record BC's legends, the people that have contributed to our province and made a difference. And actually, Mike, we did 52.
Oh, so I'm sorry. Yeah.
Quite a few profiles. And I just felt that it was time to move from people back to issues. And I find it so hard to look for and find news these days anywhere. So I want to be part of the community that's trying to keep these issues alive in respectful conversation, not he said, she said, and everybody yelling. Mm-hmm. So that's the intent.
So coming back to the issues really is about sort of, I mean, I think you're nodding to the polarization that's happening on so many topics. What's in your show, what are you trying to do to help make sure you can do that and hold the conversations in a way that is that is more about conversation than division?
Well, I have the luxury because it's my show and I co-produce with Stuart McNish. And so the idea is that I feel strongly about is I just have one person. And so immediately I'm not setting up the back and forth. But the trick is finding someone who can see the big picture, can see both sides of an issue. So choosing the guest is really, I'm finding difficult sometimes, but makes it work if it's going to work, so that we can say, yes, for instance, the first show we did was on decriminalization and safer supply. And so in talking about it, I wanted to say, okay, there were some good ideas here. Where did it go off, or how could it be done better, or what changes are required? And so that's the kind of conversation I hope to have on all the issues. But your point is really interesting. I've found the hardest part so far is making sure I find someone who can see both sides and talk respectfully about maybe what's very wrong, but also what might be done to improve the situation.
What kind of topics are you looking going forward?
Well, the first one was that the one I just recorded yesterday is on Aboriginal title and the BC Land Act. And we all saw what a mess it was when the government introduced the BC Land Act at the beginning of the legislature, and it just went boom. And then, of course, was withdrawn. But that didn't mean anything was solved or that the issues weren't the same. So we just have gone through a tricky conversation on this one, because you want to make sure that you're being understanding of everybody's position, certainly First Nations, yes, government, but also the general public, who felt quite left out of any consultation. And I think their surprise led to some of the overreaction. And not that there aren't problems. I had a chance to speak with one of Canada's top lawyers on Aboriginal law, and so Thomas Isaac. And in fact, he's been arguing these cases all across Canada. So he knows what the Constitution says. He knows what you can do. He knows what you can't do. And so giving the time, it's a half-hour show, giving the time for someone to explain the details, I hope will make a bit of a difference. And so that's a couple. And of course, my old stomping ground, the week after, I'm going to do debt and deficit, which I know everyone's on the edge of their seat. They can't wait to hear it, but it drives me crazy. It's been driving me crazy for a long time. And so we've now got the two budgets out there, and no one seems to care anymore.
We have to come back.
I would disagree with you on that, actually. I think the pendulum's swinging back, in my opinion.
That people don't care? Do care?
That people are now caring more about it. I think everyone went a little holiday for a decade.
Yeah, for a decade.
When times were good.
Okay, maybe I should say governments don't care about it.
That'd be very accurate.
What was part of the point you were making, though, Carole, like I heard in there too, like in the sense of nobody cares about it too, like the discussion about the budget just wasn't very robust. The whole budget, not just the deficit, right? Was that part of, would that be your observation?
Well, my observation is that many politicians know how to play the game. And what we saw this time on the budget was very different from the Prime Minister. He started letting out all the details. I'm not sure, was it 2 weeks ahead, 3 weeks ahead? And so every day, a new announcement, this money, a new announcement, this money. When I did a budget, it had to be so closed shop, so confidential. You just didn't, even caucus didn't know some of the things that we were about to put in the budget, because, can often move markets. If people get an indication, for instance, that there was going to be a carbon tax or wasn't going to be, whatever. So we were so silent about budgets. And now the plan is, because he knows that he can get individual headlines, front page, above the fold, day after day. He got a lot of attention to all those details, and the budget comes out and it was just reiterating what he'd already said. So it's an interesting strategy. It didn't seem to move public opinion, although you guys probably know better than I do whether the polls have moved at all. But it wasn't the way I'm used to with budgets, and therefore I think you didn't get much of a discussion when the budget came out.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, your observation, lots of nice above the fold, clean media hits matter way less than they did, back when you and I were in journalism. And I think I wanted to kind of pull this apart a little bit.
Carole is still in journalism, Kate.
Oh, when I was in okay, when you were first in journalism and I was getting started. So I'm talking about the early aughts, right? When really like that kind of front page real estate had a real currency that I don't think it has now, particularly when you're talking about a budget and trying to get the public to understand and dissect, the goodies you've sprinkled into your budget. Would you agree with that? Do you think that's shifted?
Well, I guess you've hit on the bigger problem is what's happening with print. And so, of our national papers, the National Post seems to be getting, certainly the Vancouver Sun is getting thinner, and they only publish 5 days a week. And we've seen so many local news outlets, whether if it's television, they're dropping local news or they're diminishing it. So we haven't got the breadth of reporters taking really hard looks at these issues. I can remember when I first moved to Vancouver, oh my goodness, City Hall, it was covered by George Bannerman, or Gary Bannerman and Jack Webster, Alan Fotheringham. You couldn't do anything at City Hall that wasn't watched and dissected. Now, I mean, who's covering it? There are a couple of reporters, but they're covering all kinds of things. And so it's side of the desk a bit. And so I think that that's part of why we're not seeing heavy discussions. Maybe it's because people aren't interested. I keep hoping people are interested, but the coverage is very minor. And so what people are turning to is things like podcasts, as you're doing, but also op-eds. And so someone like David Dodge drives him crazy what's happening with the budget. He'll do an op-ed. Mark Carney will do a speech that'll get covered. It's covering the budget. John Manley will be interviewed. And so that's his way of getting his analysis out there. So that's where you're getting the analysis more than from the regular beat of reporters. And obviously there's some brilliant exceptions like Robert Fife and others that are just amazing. But if we look across the board, I think that that's what's happening in terms of serious discussion. Editors just often deadlines, they want something fast. And even when I was in politics, I'd have a young reporter come to me and they'd say, you're closing illegal suites, or, whatever the hot topic was for the day. And I used to drive them crazy because I'd say, I'm going to answer your question, but first I'm going to give you the context. So I would try to educate that particular reporter about the issue. Well, in 1974, this, and then this was tried, and then this, and they say, okay, now ask your question and I'll answer. But it wasn't the reporter's fault. The editor had sent them out fast, get something quick, line is this. And so I think media's in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, on the one hand, there's a proliferation of media in some respects, right? Now we have activist media outlets like the Tyee and the Observer, and the Narwhal. We also have all sorts of people on Substack and providing, like say Terry Glavin or Geoff Meggs, our comrade here, who are providing direct stuff. So people can go curate their own media feed, so to speak.
Well, I find that difficult. I know that
there's a lot to choose from.
Someone said to me the other day, oh yeah, well, you have to make sure that you listen to Men's Bridges podcast or something. I thought, like one off rather than a newspaper where I can flip through.
Well, there's not as much aggregation uniform. I mean, it used to be back in the old days, used to be that we all watched the same newscast, we all read the paper, and we all listened to the same talk radio. And then everybody was kind of on the same page as to what the information was, which, has its downsides too. But at least it kind of promotes that public conversation.
There was an article in the paper just a couple of days ago. I still get papers that said, for a New York Yankees fan, and the young people, my kids, of course, they like to cut cable, so they don't have cable, but they have the streaming services that they like. Well, for a New York Yankees fan to watch every game in their playoffs, they had to subscribe to 6 different streaming services. So now your bills are getting higher than whatever cable used to be, but you have to pick them off. And I find that, there's a series I want to watch. Well, I've got a number of streaming, but it's not that one. And so then there's another one you have to get. And the costs, you're not aware of them because it's just a monthly thing that's buzzing away. But I'm finding it hard to get the news I want. And the other obvious thing is that, especially in the United States, some here, but especially in the United States, it's divided. So if
Yeah.
you are right wing,
Forest.
then you're going to Fox. If you're left wing, you're
Mhm.
going to MSNBC. And so you can't, unless you're channel switching and getting a piece of each to get the whole picture, you don't get the whole picture. You get
Mhm.
the presentation they think you want. And so that bias that is pretty well dug in, I don't
Mhm.
know what you do about that.
Well, that it's interesting because I think the closest we have to a version of that kind of division of news channels that happens in the U.S. is sort of the reaction we're seeing, and the stronger and stronger reaction we're seeing to the CBC, and sort of the movement on the right to defund the CBC. And I want to connect this to the fact that you did work for W5, which I think is probably one of the most award-winning and important investigative outlets we've had for a while. And and they've been canceled. I guess I want to ask, like, how does that change when that investigative work doesn't get trusted in the same way? If the CBC brand is viewed as sort of pushing one type of view or one type of politics, how does that undermine the ability of journalists working there to um, shine light where it needs to be shone, to hold power to account?
Well, I think it leads to the public mistrust of journalists. I always say I've managed to pick the two professions that are least trusted, political and journalism.
Yeah.
People just, the ratings go down.
Are you a
People-
developer as well?
No, I'm not. But with W5, it's interesting because I just got an invitation a couple of weeks ago. There's having kind of a wake for W5 and for all the people who were involved over all the years. Unfortunately, of course, it's in Toronto, but it made me think about the good journalism that was done, and it'll be a big loss. I think on your CBC point, I don't think it's just the right wing that is unhappy with CBC. I think a lot of people in the public are unhappy with CBC. And even though I was chair for a time, I didn't agree with many of the approaches. And one of the things is buying American game shows, for heaven's sakes, with Canadian taxpayer dollars. I will never figure that one out, or why there isn't a revolution about it, but there hasn't been. And so we get away from what I thought the public mandate was, which was to do programming that the privates can't afford to do or are not interested in doing: news, public affairs, documentaries, that kind of thing. And therefore, I'm happy to have my taxpayer dollars used for that. I'm not so happy with some of the other things that I see there. So it's not just the extreme right wing that is fussed about the CBC.
Well, James Moore was our guest last week, Honorable James Moore, and his point was that, see if you agree with it. If there was a massive cut to TV Ontario, he believes an equal number of right-wing and left-wing people would be upset. He said if there's a cut to the CBC, conservatives would cheer, and people on the liberal and lefty side would be very upset. He said that he thinks that's the problem with the CBC, is that when you're eliciting that different reaction from different sides of the spectrum, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah,
That's fair comment.
Well, I think that it's becoming more and more of a problem, that CBC is being seen more and more as just one particular segment of the population. When I was chair, there was a federal election going on. And also as chair, I tried to speak to all of the leaders of the political parties, Conservatives, of course, Liberals, Bloc Québécois, NDP. And I was told quietly, "Oh no, well, we only speak to the Liberals." I said, "Like, are you kidding me? Taxpayer dollars are across the board. We speak to everybody." And so I met with Harper, and I met, with the Liberals. The Bloc wouldn't meet with me, but NDP, Jack Layton at that time. And I would try to tell them what I was trying to do, listen to what their issues were. And a lot came out about how elections were covered. And so while I was there, I set up these informal panels, but across the country, and asked people to watch CBC's coverage of the election like every day, every night, because it's no good to do an analysis after the fact. Because if there's
Mhm.
been a bias or something bad going on in terms of presentation of facts, afterwards does no good. The election's done. And so it was kind of a check-in every week. Are you seeing anything that seems off or too much this side or that side? And afterwards, I went and I spoke to Harper at that time. And I said, tell me how you thought the CBC election coverage was in this past election. He said, oh, it was good. He said, but CTV. So I think that there are ways, if there's leadership that says, you know, this is where we want to be. Let's be the best at that. That the reporters and journalists that I know want to be the best. But I think it takes leadership demanding it. But you say CBC cuts, guess what? This last budget, they got another increase.
Yeah.
Even though the head of CBC had been talking about, well, we may give ourselves bonuses. I'm sorry, this is out of touch.
I think they're running out of ink at the National Mint these days. But
Yeah.
so let's talk politics. You were the finance minister. You were there were some kind of signature moments when you were running the show there. But one of the first one I wanted to touch on was labor, and I've heard you describe it as in a sporting analogy that you approach. I mean, to set up the context here, we were coming out of a period of labor acrimony in the first term of the Gordon Campbell government, where there was some really tough stuff done to some of the unions to control spending. Then there was an election and the BC Liberals were reduced, but still stayed in power. You came in at that point as finance minister when the economy, I guess, was starting to pick up. But yet you still had to deal with probably unions that were pretty mad. And all their agreements were coming due at the same time. So how did you approach that?
It was a crazy situation, Mike, because I was named finance minister in June, and within about a week was told, oh, by the way, you're responsible for all the labor negotiations.
Yeah.
Well, why isn't it labor doing this? No, because it's financial, obviously. So we had to take it on 300,000 people, more or less. All of the unions, for some really inappropriate reason, had contracts that ended on March 31st. Everybody. And so in this particular province where we've had solidarity, the potential for everybody walking out and closing down the province was hanging over our head. I was blessed to have as my deputy minister, Tamara Vrooman. And so Tamara and I, brilliant, Van City, now the airport, but we sat down and we said, okay, how much money have we actually got? And then let's figure it out how much we can offer each of the unions. We had at one point 60 tables going on. And then we said, because we were the newbies, we said, we're going to tell the unions exactly how much money we've got and how we're going to do this. And all of the professional negotiators said, no, you never say that. You start here and they start there, and then you go back and forth. We said, no, we're not doing it that way. And so we were very straight up. This is all the money we've got, and this is how we're going to do it. But one thing we added was policy tables. And we said, for every single union, nurses, doctors, teachers, whatever, come and talk to us about what policies we could change that would make your life better. And for nurses, it was sometimes about the inequity between overnight shifts and day shifts. For doctors, it was getting rid of this paper. I'm spending my life with paper. So we had something to talk about, but we were pretty clear about the money. And of course, they didn't believe us and were very angry. But another thing happened, Hurricane Katrina happened. And that shut down all the refineries in the Gulf. And the price of natural gas went through the roof. And we in BC, a lot of our revenue is natural gas. All of a sudden, I had come into my revenue stream $1 billion. Now, they weren't ongoing dollars because the refineries would get up again, but we had $1 billion, one-time money. And so I am an NFL football nut. And I've watched how they do signing bonuses, because you have to be careful with negotiations. I couldn't personally talk to any union member. That's not allowed. But I could put on the table And we just took the $1 billion, divided it by the number of employees we were talking about, and I think it worked out to something like $4,000 per employee. If you sign a new contract before your contract runs out March 31st, every single union member gets that bonus.
Mhm.
And again, nobody believed me.
And it was a
they-
significant bonus, as I recall.
Yes. Well, I did an interview at BCIT not long ago, and it was a young woman who's coming along, and she was doing a practice interview. And she said to me, I have to thank you for my bunk beds. And I said,
Oh.
huh? And she said, my mother was a teacher. We got the bonus. We got the bunk beds. And others said it was the TV that they got. But it was a way of saying, like, this is serious. And March 31st was our deadline because under GAAP
Fiscal year.
accounting rules, the money disappears, it goes to pay down debt, doesn't disappear, but it can't be used for salaries at that point. And so the union leaders didn't believe me. January was, I think, first doctors started to think, oh, maybe this is real. And our last signing was 20 minutes before midnight on March 31st. Done. I lived at that point BlackBerry because I had to sign off on each negotiation.
Oh, wow. So I worked with Tamara Vrooman at Van City, and I can say with experience, she loves throwing out a playbook. This does not surprise me at all. I want to relate it though, because what's interesting also from that time in finance, I'm thinking of the fact that we had a female deputy minister, a female minister of finance at the time. And there is a lot of research to understand how the stigma around women and money often, and how debt and spending can be viewed differently for women leaders compared to male leaders. And I'm wondering if from your time, you felt any of that, if you felt at all that you got a different treatment because you were a woman as Minister of Finance.
No, didn't. And I'd been running budgets with whether it was CBC or overseeing them on boards for most of my life. And so I didn't have to learn how to read the budget. I could understand it and I knew what I was doing. And other than Tamara, there might have been one other woman, but around our very small table, it was all men. But they would know immediately by my questions that I had been already studying the budget, and Treasury knew what I was looking for. And I didn't experience anything except huge support. They were fantastic. And they've remained friends to this day. One of the fellows who heads Treasury, anytime he's over in Vancouver, we get together and we talk again about the budget and Treasury and how it's doing and the rating agencies. So
Let's not get into that.
No. Well, so the other interesting thing you did in that time was you brought in the carbon tax. And I'm wondering, and I think, at the time, pretty successfully, I don't think the opposition gave too much traction on it. I'm wondering if.
Well, the NDP opposed it. Let's not forget that.
Opposed it. Yes, at the time. But I think it kind of came in and was generally well received compared to a time. I mean, could you have anticipated, almost 20 years later, it's such an unpopular thing?
Well, the model that I worked so hard at is long gone. And I think it was pretty successful from the beginning because of the time we took designing that carbon tax. And again, with a very small group, because carbon tax, you could not let anyone know you were really thinking about it because it really would move the stock market. And so we did all of our research. We modeled, well, what about for a family of 4 living in Vancouver? What about a single guy driving a pickup truck up north? And what about the senior who's got an old furnace? Okay, their costs are all going to be different. So how is it going to affect them? And how do we make sure that we get enough money back to them so that it genuinely was revenue neutral? And not just to people, but to businesses too. And so I won't bore you with all the number of modeling that we went through until we finally felt that we had it right. Because I felt if we didn't have even businesses say, this is pretty fair, that it would never stick and it would never be successful in the next election. And so we took in with the tax, say 100%. And of that, we anticipated that about 66% would come from business and 33% would come from people. We gave back 66% to people and 33% to businesses because we knew that a lot of businesses would pass it on. And so the way we weighted it and the finesse, and then we were set when we went public, and it really was a surprise to a lot of people. We knew the details and we knew why we were doing it. We had the answers to the questions. I had no briefing notes because I had helped build it. I helped build the budget. So I just knew what we were doing and how we were trying to do it. The first presentation I made was to the Business Council, because the Premier always takes the first one, or Gordon Campbell takes the first one with the Board of Trade. So I took the Business Council and I went through it step by step and step. And one of the best moments was Jock Finlayson afterwards said, you know, I think this is a really fair tax. And I went, all those sleepless nights, but it was the care we took. But now, of course, and it started with Christy Clark, and it continues, not all the money goes back to people. Some of it goes to other good causes or the budget, but it's not the same tax. It's not completely revenue neutral anymore.
Do you think if it had been revenue neutral all the way through, that you would, because it started $30 a ton, I think, when you brought it in? Was it 30 or
I can't even remember the exact
low
number.
level?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's now, I think, up to $85 a ton, heading much higher over the next 5 or 10 years. Do you think the revenue neutrality could have brought the public along as it laddered up the scale?
Other than the first 5 years, I never made any commitment that it would keep going up forever. But we wanted to lock in the first 5 years so that you wouldn't have this argument every year. So we locked in the first bit. But I was always open to saying, okay, is it the right pace? Is it the right dollars? And so that would have been part of the discussion along the way. And the other thing I tried very hard to do was say, this is for BC. I believe this model works for BC. And Jim Flaherty, of course, was finance minister at that time. And I had a great relationship with him. And I said, I will never be out there saying the Fed should do this or other provinces should do this, because I think each has to look at their own revenue stream and costs within their provinces and values and make their own decisions. So this was a BC carbon tax that I still felt the original model was the right one for BC. That the dollars, you know, you could have adjusted along the way.
Just after you left office, the province embarked on another major initiative, the HST. And, you know, that was obviously quite a thrill ride for those involved.
You were probably behind the scenes watching that one.
Well, I came into it when Christy was elected as leader and inherited the issue. Well, she really came to office because of the issue, because it destabilized the BC Liberal caucus considerably after the Olympics. But you know, the idea of a value-added tax, I mean, it's probably politically dead for another generation. But like, did you see that as a good idea, or do you think that it's better for the finance ministry to have more control over its levers as opposed to kind of hitching its wig on the sales tax with the federal government?
Well, it was very difficult. And I don't know, in all honesty, where I would have come down on that. But I do know that when you go into an election and promise not to do it, and you do it, you're dead in the water. I mean, it really was that more than the tax itself that enraged people. So I would like us to remember, when politicians are making promises during the campaign, they should be held to them on both sides. And really, I think that's what killed it, more than the actual cost.
The revenge of Bill Vander Zalm.
Well, let's come.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let's come back to debt and deficits for a little bit. And And I want to relate it to what's happening broadly in the sort of realignment of BC politics, particularly on the right and the center right. We definitely have in the NDP government under David Eby sort of certainly a higher degree of comfort with deficits maybe than we've had for a while. Is there an opportunity, for the right to realign on that topic, for example, and if not that, then what could bring BC United and the BC Conservatives together?
Well, context is everything, isn't it? And so this is a province that tends to lean left. And the only way a center-right party can possibly win is if it's all working together. So I worked with Kevin Falcon. I liked working with Kevin Falcon. He was a good cabinet minister. I don't know what went on behind the scenes, but I don't know why Rustad was removed from the party. I know we had a difference of opinion on climate change, but you can't pretend to be, we're a big tent party unless you don't agree with everything. So I think that was a real problem. With BC Legends, I've traveled a lot around the province and especially up north doing interviews. And John Rustad has a huge base and big support. And so they parted ways. And then there was a lot of personal talk that went on that was not nice. And so therefore they each, I think, probably got their backs up a bit about how the other person has been speaking about them. So now you've got them off in their corners in a way. And so I don't think it's an issue like debt or something else that would bring them together. You've got two leaders that are not very happy with one another. And the other problem a bit is that even if John Rustad and Kevin Falcon somehow said, okay, somehow we'll work together, I'm not sure that all the Conservatives who have now moved away from the BC Liberal United Party would come back. I think that they are feeling their oats. They're finally getting their say, because they were always a little unhappy under the BC Liberals when I was there, because they didn't like that Liberal association with the federal government. And I understand that. I understand it, but somehow it worked. But now I think the disruption is really huge. I know there are a number of major players behind the scenes talking to both of them, trying to get them together, but we're getting late in the game. And I do think that there's a core of Conservatives now who wouldn't be very happy to come back. So whatever Premier Eby does, and I think he's done some really good things, and on debt, of course, I disagree, but he looks to me like he's going to be winning the election. Although it wasn't the last poll, didn't it say the Conservatives had gone ahead of the...
Yeah, the Main Street poll recently had them ahead, and it's been a bumpy kind of end of session for the government, right? Just with a lot of changing positions. So we've been having a bit of a debate on at Hotel Pacifico with Mike in his Big Bang theory pushing the idea that there's hope for some kind of coming together before the election. And Geoff and I'm gonna have to come up with another name for this, but as the political creationists,
you were
saying
left-wing creationists.
But do you see it potentially coming together with any speed, Carole? Like, I think you're saying no. Like, this is just going to take time.
I think it's getting harder and harder, and the election is close.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think nature abhors a vacuum, or political nature abhors a vacuum. So that's why I'm thinking something might happen.
Oh, so Mike McDonald's going to be the next leader of the. I know, actually, I do know that there's a group
disaster.
Trying to.
I already led the government. Glenn Clark appointed me premier some years ago, apparently.
Did you do a good job?
Well, he doesn't seem to think so. He did not think I did a good job.
No.
Most decisively not. I believe he was a legend too, was he not? Was he one of your legends?
No.
Oh, he didn't make the cut. Sorry, Glenn. You're not a legend. We can't have an episode without talking about Glenn Clark. So I want to ask you a question as we wrap up here. You've served with distinction provincially and municipally what would be your advice to someone who's considering entering politics today?
I am so worried that of all the people that I've interviewed, all of the legends, I talk about how do we get good people to run in government or to serve in the public service? Like, how do we do it? And almost to a person, they say, nobody I know would run. And the biggest reason is social media.
Mhm.
It's become so nasty, so uncontrollable. The anonymous comments that can be made based on nothing, or going back into your yearbook to see, did you ever take a misstep? Nobody's perfect, for heaven's sakes. And so the kind of gamesmanship and cruelty that's going on is driving so many good people away. So if someone showed some interest in any level of politics, I would say, get away from social media. It's so tempting to follow it and watch it and then try to counteract it, and it'll tear you apart. So stay away from social media.
Good
It's
advice.
impossible to stay with great advice. And
Well, you can be on it. You don't have to read it. You know.
yeah, and don't like conspicuous weird posts.
I was
No,
also like, also don't read the newspaper.
Well, I'm
But,
afraid that they're going to take my
that's-
newspaper away from me
I
sometime.
know,
Yeah.
I know.
Well, Carol, really appreciate you stopping into the Hotel Pacifico. We had
Well,
great
thank you.
discussion with you. We hope you'll come back another time.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Guests, let me tell you about Yo. He is a golden eagle who is said in the tradition of the Yinka Dene people to watch over the land, the people, the salmon, and the oceans. Yo lives in the highest regions of Earth and sees everything. And if you are in and around Prince George, you might see images of Baby Yo closer to Earth on TELUS's fleet of trucks, as depicted by local artist Johnny Ketlow III of the Frog Clan of the Nadli Wooten Yinka Dene people. Other images you might see on the fleet include a salmon, which is considered the life's blood that runs through the veins of the earth. Salmon feed all of creation, from the bear to the killer whale to the Yinka Dene, the people of the earth, and all races connected under the sun and the moon. You might also see 4 feathers in the indigenous flag colors of white, red, black, and yellow. They recall the different races of the earth as all of my relations, humanity in all our different colors. Ketlow is the 5th Indigenous artist to contribute their work to the TELUS Fleet Branding Program, which was launched in 2021. Collaborations like this are helping the people of Prince George learn more about the Dene people and their strong culture and stories that connect their community to each other and to the land. In amplifying local Indigenous stories and talent, TELUS is connecting local communities to the land and to Indigenous cultures and traditions as part of their commitment to be a culturally responsive and inclusive company. Visit TELUS.com/reconciliation to read more about the story of Baby Yo and to see more of Ketlow's incredible work.
Hello, you've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Good to see you, Geoff.
Good morning.
Good
Or
morning.
good day.
Good
Yeah.
day. Good day. Midday.
Top of the,
Well,
top of the day to you, Mr. Meggs.
top of the
Comrade Meggs.
day. All right.
Podcasts are timeless. Yeah.
We have a bit of housekeeping actually to do at Hotel Pacifico. We do read your comments, listeners. And I have to say, we had some great commentary last week on the question we were exploring about why John Rostad is spending so much time on vaccines. I think you picked this one up, Mike.
Yeah, on YouTube, Scott says John Rustad's position on nurses and vaccines is informed by a lack of access in rural areas, coupled with a general skepticism about vaccines more broadly. So, I mean, a good point. That it's a different reality in rural BC in terms of, the vaccination rate is different than the urban centers, and they are having issues with healthcare staffing. So I thought
Yeah,
fair point to throw into the debate, which we didn't cover off in our discussion. So
completely agreed. Completely agree. Okay, so I'm gonna move us along because it has been a big week, a bumpy week for the government and a big week in general. And I'm gonna start with the obvious one with decriminalization. So I think it was on Friday, Premier David Eby announced he'd ask Health Canada to amend the rules for the decriminalization pilot by making it illegal to use in public. I think this did get a mention. I mean, this is such big news. It's playing into Ontario politics, and I know it was a subject of discussion on our sister podcast, Curse of Politics. I think they were making the case that this was really Premier David Eby responding to Pierre Poilievre. What do you think of that take, Geoff?
Well, I think David Eby had to respond to the politics of it for sure, but I think Proliev was responding to them as well. I don't think he caused them. But I just want to do a quick recap here because I think in the future, when we look back at this change, we'll see this is the high watermark of the harm reduction movement in the entire response to the overdose crisis. And harm reduction means you do what you can to reduce the harms to people in society from drug use. It's only one part of the whole spectrum of responses, but it's been predominant really since Gordon Campbell broke new ground back in the days in Vancouver with the needle exchange, which was intended to reduce infection and so on. And decriminalization was a consensus position in BC as little as 2 years ago across all parties and the police. And the position adopted was recommended by the provincial health officer, broadly debated, and then brought in with the support of the police over the objections of some harm reduction advocates who thought that the amount that a person with substance abuse disorders could carry was too low. But the street disorder that we've seen has triggered a public reaction that was really gaining strength. The question that I can't answer is whether or not decriminalization caused that, because no one said it would lead to a reduction in overdose deaths, right? But it became very disturbing for members of the public. And I know even during the pandemic, when I came back to Vancouver from Victoria, but especially since I've moved back to Vancouver, and I'm sure this is true province-wide, the impact of fentanyl on a person using those substances is immediate and devastating. I mean, it feels to me like people are stopped in their tracks, no matter where they are. So I don't think we've seen the end of this. I think I just heard your guest, Carole Taylor, saying, our guest, Carole Taylor, that she thinks it'll be an election issue. I think that was one of the things she said about it. But I think she's absolutely right, because what's happened here, if I can just continue briefly, is that an exemption was achieved from Ottawa to make it legal to be in possession of 2.5 grams of substances, very low amount, which the police had never really been seizing anyway in a major way. They had the right to because it was an offense, but they didn't bother. Just as for years, people carrying a couple of joints were pretty well free to go. And so then it became a policy under the exemption that you could carry that without fear. So people assume now that led to this, explosion in their minds of use. What's happened, instead of canceling the pilot project, which was Kevin Falcon's demand and had some common sense to it, I must say, I hate to say that about the BC United position, but it's a pilot program. We got big problems. We could regroup. The government decided instead to seek a broad brush amendment to the exemptions that were in place that would reinstate the prohibition, as you say, in public spaces. So will the police now do what they weren't doing before when they didn't have to? I don't know. If I'm a member of the public who wants these folks moved away from wherever they are, will the police respond? I don't know. And within that, there's one more thing, which is that the efforts by the government to fix this were stopped by a Supreme Court judge at the prompting of a group called the Harm Reduction Nurses Association, who left the government with no exit. In other words, there was an attempt to respond to the public, which was passed through the legislature or done by policy. I forget exactly which way they did it, but anyway, they had done it. And the court said, no, you can't, and we're going to get to this in our own good time. So a very tough situation. I don't think we've heard the last of it, but I do think when we look back, we'll say this is where the debate over the addiction crisis changed in a big way.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning actually the decision from Chief Justice Hinkson, because I think it's important to mark, and I think it points to how difficult this is going to be for the government, because I think no matter what shifts, the opioid crisis is still going to be present. And I think in the minds of people, a lot of the public consumption they're seeing and just whatever they're seeing around their neighborhoods, around drug use, they will probably put at the Premier's store or some not insignificant subset of the population. On the other side, from the sort of harm reduction advocates, I think the challenge is the decision from Chief Justice Hinkson was on the grounds that asking people to sort of go into a way out of public spaces and it created irreparable harm on the grounds that it's when people use alone that they die. And so I worry that for the government, they've kind of got a no-win situation here, both in that the public seems to have really been pushing back, and public opinion seems to have really gone against the pilot. And then on the other side, the harm reduction communities are going to really not like this shift from Premier David Eby on asking people to go into private, quiet places where they are more at risk. Mike, I want to pick up with you because I think one of the things, one of the distinctions now too that the Eby government is in, we have Kevin Falcon calling for the end of the pilot, but then we have, Premier David Eby basically, I think a U-turn's not quite right. He's not ending the pilot. What he's saying is we want to stop use in public. Is this going to resonate with voters? Are they going to appreciate these differences? And who's going to, what's going to be the legacy of this for, I think, the Eby government?
Well, let me start by saying that I think where I perceive the public's at is that I think the public would like to see a compassionate position without the visible manifestations of what they perceive as decrim in terms of what they're seeing on the streets. And for a lot of people, that's like the off-ramp on that discussion is treatment, which sometimes gets held up as a panacea, which is a low percentage success rate usually, in my understanding. Fentanyl's, it's not going to be, you can't press a button and cure somebody of a fentanyl addiction. You can try to keep them alive, but this is hard stuff. These are intractable problems, and I don't think there are any easy political solutions on this, else it would be done
or cheap ones.
Or cheap ones, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, having said that, like I think there's, the public, there's a general sense where I think the public will like it to go. But for the government though, I think this is, I'd be concerned that this is a pattern where I might say this, Geoff couldn't possibly comment, but where I think the Horgan government may have approached these issues and stopped short of the line out of caution or just their political assessment of the situation or their worldview, whereas I think the Eby government's gone further on some of these things, perhaps because of pent-up demand within the party to deal with some issues that maybe hey, we're in power, let's do this, right? And Land Act, decrim.
That's a hotel. That's like the bellhop bell, right? Ding.
Dock management on the Sunshine Coast.
Dock management. That's about determining issue.
Output-based pricing. There was a lot behind the scenes. Wasn't really a public issue, but there was a bit of a U-turn there.
Okay.
So, we're not giving any more money to the Surrey police. Maybe another 100 million.
Okay, before we move
That's
to
a louder
that topic,
ding. That's a louder ding. Yeah.
But I do want to go back to where I started from, just to reiterate. This was a consensus position. The Standing Committee on Health discussed with unanimous recommendations to the legislature from all parties how to fine-tune decriminalization, not how to get rid of it. There was no debate on that point. And in this case, the Eby government's implementing what was a very, very broadly supported initiative, which the police even signed on to. And like you can see today in Toronto, the police chief is trying to stay on the course there. So I think that
But that not more to do with possession though, right? Like that's in terms of decriminalization, like, there's a lot of broad consensus
no, that's what
on a libertarian basis, right?
People did not anticipate there would be this huge and totally unacceptable outbreak of street disorder. It wasn't predictable. If it was predictable, I didn't hear the predictions, and it wasn't canvassed in any way.
It's been going on for a while though, like the street stuff.
But it is worse, I think.
I think back to the Strathcona few years ago, right? It was a pretty big deal.
But it's provincial now, I think, in scope.
But
these are good questions to bear on. I don't, I just say on this one, I think it's distinguishable from the other examples you give.
Well, we only have one ding. We don't have two different types of
Some of your
dings.
dings are
So
loud.
No, but you
dings
should
in
leave
here.
it out of your ding list.
Yeah,
you think it's a non-ding ding?
I
Unding
don't
it.
know. We need to
unding,
retire.
yeah.
This bell needs to take a nap. Okay.
Okay.
Because let's pivot though, because
We'll give
picking
Geoff
up.
another sound effect next week. He can bring his own
Okay.
sound effect.
Okay.
I didn't even know I had sound effects. I'm
Oh
gonna make
yeah,
a list.
that's the power
Okay.
we have. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we have
All
lots of
right, all
power
right,
in
We
Hotel
do.
Pacifico.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
But let's, speaking of, we have a clipping. We have a clipping this week, and it's actually from Rob Shaw writing in the Orca.
Not
and
another Rob Shaw clipping, really?
Okay. Well, we do moratorium.
He's
Is
very,
this-
he's very,
Are you
he's
guys
very,
beefing? Are
he's
you guys
very,
beefing?
no, not at all. He's
Do
just
we have
very
a pod
prolific.
beef?
He's very
He's prolific.
prolific.
He
He's
is.
prolific, and I'm intimidated.
He's prolific, and I have to say, this one I think he's bang on. Not to get ahead of myself here, but let's say Rob Shaw writing about actually the reversal in position from Premier David Eby on decriminalization, and comparing it to other sort of reversals that Premier John Horgan did. And I think there's actually some really good examples of language here. But his point is that, John Horgan did a bit more of the apologize and move, whereas you really didn't hear an apology or I was wrong from Premier David Eby in this one. So the John Horgan language is, it is clear to me that I made the wrong call in relation to the Royal Museum, right? And the $1 billion renovation of that. And then in this case with decrim, it's David Eby talking, I'll say it, my own opinion, kind of talking a bit like a lawyer. It's clear to me that, as opposed to something like a sort of owning a mistake with the public. I'll start with you, Geoff. Do you think there is a difference in style and how these two premiers apologize?
Well, I don't think apologies are a hard comparison to make. And I go back to my main point here. This was not something where David Eby made a decision on his own to do decriminalization and then it didn't work. And John Horgan didn't make the museum decision all by himself, but he took full responsibility for it. It was a decision of the government. Decrim was a policy recommended by the provincial health officer and broadly supported, and it had consequences, as we just discussed, that weren't anticipated. So I'm not surprised that David Eby didn't say, hey, decriminalization was my idea, because it wasn't his idea. What he's trying to do, and I think Mike's pointing out that I agree with Mike's view about the public. The public is basically compassionate and wants to support people and are conflicted a bit on how to understand that, because not everybody has direct experience with addiction. But the other point made, and we talked about it briefly last week, I think, is the so-called secret report that Bonnie Henry commissioned, which was on the desk. Not many people heard about it. It came up in question period. But she's got a report in her hands now from an eminent American expert whose most recent political point is we should stigmatize hard drug use. And he compares it to how we stigmatize overuse of alcohol and how we stigmatize cigarette use. And, I think that's why I say the debate about addiction is heading at last to a new and more profound stage. But whether the election will produce a consensus outcome and the resources necessary to deal with it across the whole spectrum of homelessness, mental health, and so on, I hope so, but I'm not counting on it.
I don't think these issues are necessarily ideological. I mean, they are to some respect. Like in harm reduction, I think there's a definite left-right slant on that. But on recovery itself,
I agree.
I mean,
That's right.
we had
Yeah.
Marshall Smith on here in January, and
Exactly.
there's no denying Marshall's passion for recovery, which the Daniel Smith government people may. And the Kenney government, they may disagree with their prescriptions, but they're seized of the issue, right? So it will be interesting to see what alternative visions are put forward by BC United or BC Conservative or the Greens.
I agree. Very interesting week, though.
Very interesting week. Well, speaking of, let's move to Surrey. Hearings began this week on whether the province can force the city of Surrey to replace the RCMP and transition to its own police force. It's off to a rough start for the premier, who's featuring heavily in the first affidavit, with the premier's office needing to push back on some of the version of events that was painted so far. I want to talk about this because I think we can talk about this in terms of the issue of community safety and how vulnerable the NDP are on that. Actually, maybe let's stop there. Actually, in fact, because I do want to name too. At the same time, we've got this poll coming out from Main Street that has the Conservatives ahead for the first time and ahead of the NDP. And I'll start with you, Geoff. Do you feel like broadly the NDP are vulnerable, and are they vulnerable in particular on this issue that's now polling as such a priority with voters of community safety?
Well, community safety is always a tough one, but I love Korean streaming dramas on Netflix, and sometimes I get caught because I really enjoy the first 4 episodes and then discover there's 27 different episodes, and that's how I feel about the Surrey police drama. I kind of enjoyed the first season, but now it's really getting tiresome. But I think a lot of people.
Jeff,
That was awesome.
you were saying before the broadcast that you were very weak on cultural references, and then you
That was
dropped,
epic.
then
That
you
was
dropped
epic.
Korean drama, streaming dramas
was
on
so
us.
good.
Like,
Well, it's a bit of an
like,
obscure
are
niche
you a
obsession.
say one
Okay.
thing, do another kind of guy?
No, I
I'll
can
take
join
that
you
as-
in that.
I'll take that as a compliment. And let me finish
Okay.
my point. So back in Surrey, friends of mine who are on the ground there tell me that people are just sick of the debate.
Mhm.
It's not clear that it'll be vote determining. I think the risk for the government is that it appears to be unmanaged and unmanageable.
Yes.
And so it's really how are they governing as opposed to do I care about the outcome or have any skin in the game?
Well, it's a bit of a he
So
said,
we'll
she
see.
said now too, with Brenda Locke, like the premier and Brenda Locke. Like that dynamic's not a good look.
Well, there's a law in place. The judge will make a decision. Part of the transition up till now has been funded. I mean, I think the end is in sight, but this is, nobody wants to have 5 days in court with the premier's and other people's notes or staff notes and other notes and affidavits. It's not the kind of way you want to organize your time, for sure. So we'll see what the judge says here. The city's saying the province can't do what it did, and if the judge is right, then Brenda Locke will have a big problem.
Let me give it to you, Mike, and say, like, is the NDP vulnerable? Is this Main Street poll picking up on something that's real? And if so, what can you put your finger on what's shifted for them?
I just didn't have a chance to say tough grandma yet.
Sorry, yeah.
So
Tough grandma.
okay,
Tough
Main
grandma was
Street
premier.
poll. Fun fact: the
You're
Main
not going to
Street
talk about methodology,
the
are
Main
you?
Street poll. Yeah, everyone
Please
fast
don't.
forward for 5 minutes. No, just kidding. Main Street has the Polyev federal conservatives at 56% as part of that poll. So interpret that as you will. That's a historically high number for the federal
By
conservatives.
about 10 points, right?
So yeah, I mean, look, either Main Street's ahead of the curve or they're on a different curve altogether. But psychologically, these polls have an impact regardless of how much you believe them or not. And that's just stacked up against on a pile of other polls that are there that are having an impact on, or they're hurting BC United.
Just another reason why John Rustad will not pick up the phone if it says Kevin Falcon line 1. I don't see him doing that.
Mm-hmm. No
Well,
big bang. No big bang.
well, this Friday at the Independent Contractors and Builders Association, ICBA, which for those who don't know is been a pretty significant organization in the province in support of free enterprise politics. They're having a big dinner on Friday featuring football legends Terry Bradshaw and Howie Long, who were on the Fox Sports panel. Kate, if you didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
NFL
Thanks.
football.
I'm watching Korean dramas more regularly.
Anyways, so you're gonna have there's gonna be like over 1,000, very excited football fans and / free enterprisers at this dinner, including me. And I would think that Mr. Rustad and Mr. Falcon will both be at that dinner. I'm guessing. And if they are there, Jeff, what do you think is going to happen?
This is like a setup. This is
I think I don't know what music will be playing. I'll leave that to people who are. Their eyes will lock across the room, and then everything will slow down, and there'll be sort of sparkles in the air, and they'll start kind of skipping towards each other with their arms outreached. Right?
Yes.
I'm sure of it. I think Carole Taylor was a bit negative about how hostile the two of them are. I think deep down there's a lot of respect there.
There's a lot of love. It'll be
Actually,
like that scene from The Notebook where like Rachel McAdams runs into Ryan Gosling's arms.
So Chris Gardner, who's the head of the ICBA, and Jordan Bateman, he of the transit referendum, ran it from his basement in his slippers fame. They could engineer the room so there's a kind of a long passageway in between the tables so that the entire crowd could see Rosette and Falcon slowly, as you suggest, Geoff, running to each other in a loving embrace.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
they'll lock them in a back room and tell them not to come out until they've made a deal. That strikes me more as a football
know.
approach.
Before
So-
today, I would have said there was a dearth in sort of the crossover political genre and rom-com genre and rom-com
And sports now too.
and
Football.
sports. This is just a triple threat. This sounds like an epic. I mean, how do I get a
Well,
ticket, Mike?
Well, we were talking, the Conservatives tried to bring in a bill to stop transgendered women from playing in men's sports or, that whole arrangement. And the NDP majority refused to even allow it first reading. So we'll have to see where that's at, what's happening there, where BC United was on that one.
Well, and Mike, I expect you to report back on what drinks are served and what aphrodisiacs you try and slip in there for them. Yeah.
I'll have a full report on the ICBA event next week.
Fantastic,
Excellent.
fantastic.
Okay,
So
good.
right now, we'll grab our drinks.
Have you ever noticed I can go on, weeks on end, in fact, about energy efficiency? Well, let's talk now about what that looks like in practice. FortisBC has embarked on a $50 million project aimed at uncovering the best pathway to reduce energy use in older homes and multifamily housing units, an essential step in meeting BC's climate action targets. This is important because older homes and apartment buildings pose a complex challenge, as a significant number were built before energy efficiency was incorporated into the National Energy Code for buildings over 25 years ago. FortisBC is working to improve the building envelopes and mechanical systems of 20 homes and 4 multi-unit residential buildings across the province. The goal of this pilot is to reduce their energy use and associated GHG emissions by at least 50%. As far as I know, this is actually the largest targeted real-world study of deep energy efficiency upgrades that has taken place in BC homes. And let's not forget that buildings account for over 10% of BC's greenhouse gas emissions. FortisBC will analyze the energy reductions, customer experience, and overall costs, helping realize energy efficiencies with home and building owners in ways that might have been out of reach before. Hey, FortisBC, maybe you should analyze energy efficiency at Hotel Pacifico. Some of the opinions here can sometimes be highly inefficient. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I already sort of mentioned one of mine, but I'm going to toast sarcastically the oil companies, because on April 1st, BC motorists experienced, according to government analysis, about a 3 cent per liter hike in gas costs because of the carbon tax, for which there was quite a big political outcry. But subsequently, gas prices have risen a further 17 cents, and everybody seems to be okay so far. So just here's to the oil companies and the others who are in the supply chain there for being able to pull off about a 4 or 5 time size increase than the government did for reducing our emissions on April 1st. Here's to the oil companies.
We'll have to, at one time, I'd like to dig into a bit what we mean at Hotel Pacifico when we do a sarcastic raised glass versus a shot. But we'll have to develop our own lexicon, I think.
We
at some
raise a
point.
shot.
We raise a shot.
It's raising a shot.
Raising a
Toss a
shot.
shot.
Raising a shot. Yeah, it's well,
Yeah.
a
Okay.
shot-
I'm into it.
it's a
Yeah, I
shot
like it.
out.
back east. It's hey you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're just less shouty out here. We're more subtle about it. It's a little
Jeff, I
passive
thought you were
aggressive.
going to take a shot at the curse of politics, Jeff.
No, I
Yeah,
I
you already
wanted
did
to
it.
say.
Oh, did he?
I would
Okay.
take
Yeah.
a shot or give a shot. I'll give a shot because
Yeah.
they mentioned us today, and with regard to we started off with that Polyev and whether he was driving the
Right.
concern about drug stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Catch up, Mike.
Ah.
We're good.
I wasn't paying attention. Take a shot at myself. So, hey, I've got a glass to raise, and we talked about him earlier on the Carole Taylor segment, but Stu McNish, former
Oh.
Global BC reporter, and who runs Oh Boy Productions here in Vancouver. And I had a chance to see his studio not long ago when I was guesting on Dallas Smith's podcast, Res Dog Walkers. And, they cram a lot into that studio in terms of the shows they do, both sports, Don Taylor, who I love, but also the Mo Meir Show, Linda Steele and Jody Vance, Carole Taylor's show, and also Conversations That Matter. And I think a lot of the things that Stu is supporting are what we're trying to do on this show, which is have a conversation, have a discussion that hopefully enlightens people and is entertaining. And I say good for you, Stu, and everyone involved. That's, while mainstream journalism may have its struggles these days, it's good that there's other content that's filling in the blanks. And say good for you.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to raise my glass today, and it's going to be like a dry white wine with ice cubes in it, because I'm doubling down on the like middle-aged minivan mom vibe today. Because this one comes from the fact that I was just looking through my emails and reminded that tomorrow starts the lawn watering restrictions in Vancouver, May 1st. And we're in, I think it's called phase 1, where it's like, if you're even, you water your lawn on Saturday, and if you're odd, you water your lawn on Sundays. But it reminded me that we are.
Whoa. You have a lawn? Like, that's like the new smoking.
Yeah.
Like, there should be a warning label on your house.
I hope you have a
Okay.
standing, hope you have a
It's a
standing
drought.
desk.
Yeah, well, I have a lawn, but also, yeah, like it will die immediately.
There
We do
are
not water
alternatives
it.
for
We do
this.
not.
There
Okay,
are
this is not
alternatives.
where I was trying to go with this. You're ruining my vibe. But yeah, like, yes, we have a lawn. It is tiny, and we just let it die because I don't prioritize water for lawn watering. But my point was that we are moving into what is likely to be an historically bad wildfire season, and potentially just a really bad, just another bad summer. And I was reminded to sort of be cognizant of my water use, and wanted to raise my glass, I think, to one, to sort of all the regulations that I know some people really do care about their lawns, and I have some neighbors who are lovely people who do, and to remind all of us that this all really matters, and that I think we're going to get deeper into this season and be reminded why we take these steps and these measures. So that's my glass raised, my white wine with floating ice cubes this week as a middle-aged mom.
Maybe just hold the ice cubes. That would save some water too.
Yes. Maybe just not have
Geoff,
one.
you're on fire today, Geoff. Okay. Thank you both. Thanks, Geoff and Mike, for another excellent episode. I want to thank our guest, Carole Taylor, for joining us today at Hotel Pacifico. I also want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and Fortis BC for making Hotel Pacifico possible. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.
Checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.